I have buried more men than I have years, and I have rowed out into water that would freeze the prayer on your lips, and in all that time I never saw the sea give a man back the way it gave back the Duke of Caromere. It did not give him back to me. It gave him to a girl in a wet gray shawl who had no more business on those rocks than a candle has in a hurricane, and who went out onto them anyway, because that was the only way she knew how to be. My name is Silas Coombe. For 40 years I was coxswain of the lifeboat at Saltraven, which is to say I was the man who decided, on the black nights, whether we launched or whether we stood on the shingle and listened to men die. I am old now, and my hands will not close all the way, and the young ones humor me and give me the warm seat by the boathouse stove and let me tell my tales twice. But I was there for all of it, from the first winter to the last, and if I do not set it down there will be no one left who knows how it truly went. They have made a pretty story of it in the town, a story with a wedding at the end and all the hard edges filed off. The truth is better than the story and harder, and I mean to tell it plain, because she deserves the plain of it, and because the plain of it is the only thing I have left to give her. Begin then with the light. There is a headland north of Saltraven Harbor that the old charts call Rackpoint, and the name is honest. The sea comes at it from 3 sides, and in a gale the rollers stand up green and taller than a house and throw themselves onto the black teeth below in a way that makes strong men go quiet and old men go home. In my grandfather's time they lost a boat there every second winter, and there is a corner of the churchyard that is nothing but Rackpoint's harvest stones with no name on them, only a date and the word mariner, because the sea does not give back faces, only the sad wet shapes of men. And because the town could never agree whose purse should pay for it, there was for years no light on that killing point at all. Only a rusted iron cresset, an old fire basket on a pole, tarred against the weather and half eaten through with rust, that a man was once meant to fill with pitch and coal and set burning when the glass fell, to warn the ships off the teeth. A poor thing. But on a black coast, a poor light is the whole difference between a ship that lives and a ship that does not, and every soul in Saltraven knew it, and none of them would put a penny to it, and so it fell, as such things always fall, to a man who would do it for nothing. That man in the years I am telling of was Jonas Fenn. Jonas was a fisherman like his father before him, a big, slow, gentle man with hands like a pair of hams, and a way of going quiet in company as though words cost him money. He could mend a net faster than he could say good morning, and he took the keeping of the cresset seriously in the way that quiet men take up the things no one thanks them for, as a kind of private religion. Every foul night up he'd go with his creel of coal on his back and his flint in his pocket and light the beacon, and then sit by it in the wet and the roar till dawn to feed it, feeding it coal by coal so it would not gutter, because a light that shows for an hour and then dies is worse than no light at all. It teaches a ship's master to trust a shore that will betray him. Jonas understood that. He was paid nothing for it, not a farthing. It was simply understood, in the way a town understands the things it would rather not look at, to be Fenn's to do, as it had been his father's, and the town let it stay understood so that it would never have to reach into its own pocket and make it a matter of coin. He had a daughter, Mercy. Her mother was long dead of a childbed fever, and so the girl went up to the light with her father from the time she could walk, wrapped in a shawl and set on a flat stone by the fire while he tended it, and she learned the keeping of it the way other children learn their catechism, the striking of the flint, the banking of the coal so it burned slow and long, the reading of the sky and the swell, the knowing of which cloud in the west meant weather by midnight. By the time she was 10 she could lay and light the cresset as well as her father. By the time she was 15 he would send her up alone on the middling nights and stay home with his bad chest by their own fire, and never worry, because he knew the light was as safe in her hands as in his. She was a plain child and grew into a plain young woman. I say it not unkindly, for she would say it herself, being a person who had no vanity in her at all. She was brown as a hazelnut from a life in the wind, small and spare, with a wide, steady mouth that did not smile easily and gray eyes that always seemed to be reading the weather even when they were turned on you. She had none of the softness the town admired in its girls, none of the pink-hand-ribbon prettiness that gets a girl looked at across a churchyard. She was the sort a fishing town's eye slides off of. And a fishing town, being a place that likes its futures tidy, had settled Mercy Fenn's fate for her before she was 17, in the low, sure way such places settle things. She would keep her father's cottage and grow spare and useful and unmarried and tend his light after him, and one day be a thin old woman that children were a little afraid of, and that would be that. It was not cruelty. It was worse than cruelty. It was a decision made without a single hard thought, the way you decide the weather looks like rain. Then came the November that took Jonah's, and I must tell it slow, because everything that came after is folded up inside that one black night. It had been blowing 3 days, on and off, a nasty, dirty nor'easter with sleet riding in it, and the coal in Jonah's store had run low, lower than he'd meant to let it, because the fishing had been poor and he'd been careful of his pennies and had not laid in as he ought. And that particular evening the glass fell hard and fast, and word came up from the harbor that a collier, a coal ship, of all the bitter jests, a ship carrying the very thing he was short of, was due up the coast in the night, running late and running hard for a northern port. Jonah's needed coal to light her a warning she could not do without, and he had not enough coal in his store to keep the cresset burning till dawn, and so he did the plain, sensible thing that killed him. He went down into the town in the dark to the harbor store to beg or buy or borrow more. I have gone over it 1,000 times. There was no wickedness in it. There was only a low tide of small, ordinary carelessnesses, the town's and his own, that ran out together on one bad night. The harbor steps down to the store are steep and old, worn hollow in the middle by 300 years of feet, and that night they were glazed with sleet and black as the inside of a chimney, and Jonah's Fenn, a big man carrying an empty creel, hurrying because there was a ship on the water, went down on those steps in the dark and struck his head on the stone edge of them and did not get up. The tide was making. It came in over the lower steps, as it did every night of the world, patient and blind, and it came over him where he lay, and by the time a man going down to his boat in the gray of the morning found him, it was long past any help. And because Jonah's Fenn lay dying on the harbor steps, the cresset on Rackpoint, unfed, burned down through the small hours and went out. And because the light went out, the collier came up the coast in the last black of the storm with nothing to warn her, and saw the teeth of Rackpoint too late, only the white of the water breaking on them, and put her helm over too hard and too slow, and lost 2 men over her side into that sea before she clawed herself off and limped away north with her crew short by 2. 2 men she never got back. 2 men and Jonah's in one night, for the want of a fire on a pole and a purse to pay for the coal to feed it. Mercy was 19. I went to the cottage the day after they brought her father up from the harbor, because I had known Jonah's all my life, and there was no one else whose place it was to go. I did not know what I would find. A girl of 19 with her father dead of the town's meanness, I braced myself for weeping, or for that awful stillness that is worse than weeping. I found neither. I found her packing coal into a creel. The cottage was very poor and very clean. There was a low fire and a scrubbed table and her father's chair, empty, pushed back against the wall as though someone had risen from it in a hurry and not come back, which of course was the truth of it. And Mercy stood by the hearth in her father's oilskin coat, far too big for her, the shoulders hanging off her small ones and the hem of it, wet already though she had not yet been out, packing coal she could ill spare into the creel, her face gray and set and her jaw locked hard, and she would not look at me straight. "Girl," I said. I did not know what to say to her, and so I said the thing that was true. "You'll not go up there tonight. You've not buried your father yet. Sit by your fire. Let the town's light look to itself for one night. It owes you that and more." "The glass is falling," she said. That was all, "the glass is falling," as though that answered the whole of it. And I stood there in the doorway with my hat in my hands and understood slowly that to her it did answer the whole of it. She meant that weather was coming. And where weather comes, ships come, beating up the coast for shelter. And where ships come, men can die on the teeth of Rackpoint if there is no light to warn them. And there had been no light, on the one night it mattered most, and her father was dead, and the collier's 2 men were dead, all of them for the want of the light, and there would never again, as long as Mercy Finn drew breath, be no light on Rackpoint. She did not say all that. She was not a girl who said things. She was a girl who did them and let the doing say it. She said the glass is falling, and she shouldered the creel. I saw her stagger under the weight of it and set her feet unsteady, and I did not dare offer to carry it, for I understood even then, dimly, that this was hers and that to take it from her would be to take from her the only thing she had left to stand on. And she went out past me into the dark and up the headland and lit the beacon, on the very night after her father's death, and sat by it in the wet till dawn. And then she did it the next foul night, and the next, and every foul night for 7 winters. Let me set that down as plainly as I can, because the town has since grown very fond of pretending it was otherwise, of remembering it as a thing that was somehow arranged and paid for and proper. No one paid Mercy Finn a penny, not the parish, not the harbor, not the county. There was talk once, the winter after Jonas died, of the vestry voting her some small sum for the coal, and the talk went on for 2 meetings, and in the end it was decided that as the light had always been kept for nothing, there was no call to start paying for it now, and besides the vestry funds were low, and besides the Fenn girl seemed content to do it, and so nothing was voted and nothing was paid, and everyone went home to their warm suppers well pleased with their prudence. She dug her own coal from the poor thin seam behind the cottage that her father had worked, breaking it out of the wet earth with a mattock, a slight girl doing a strong man's work in the cold. She carried it up the headland herself, creel by creel by creel, bent double under it, the mile of climbing cliff path in all weathers. She lit the fire and she fed it through the worst nights of the year while the fat and the comfortable slept warm in their beds behind her, and in 7 winters, hear me, not one ship struck the teeth at Rackpoint. Not one. Men who had cursed that point for a graveyard all their lives came up the coast now on the dirty nights and saw the light burning steady in the murk and bore away in good time and came safe to harbor, and never once, not one of them, thought to ask whose hands had lit it. It was simply there. It was Fenn's light. It had always been there. This town had a very great gift, the greatest gift of any place I ever knew, for being kept alive by the very people it could not trouble itself to see. I saw her. I will have that written if I have nothing else written. On the nights we had the lifeboat out, pulling our hearts loose for some vessel in trouble off the bay, 12 men at the oars in water that came green over the gunwale. I would look up from the stroke, when I could spare a glance from the sea, and there on the black shoulder of the headland would be her fire, small and steady in all that murder, and I would know, in the middle of my own fear, that whatever else drowned that night it would not be a ship run blind onto Rackpoint. Because the plain, unpaid girl was up there, in the wet, keeping her promise to a dead man. There were nights her light was the only kind thing in the whole black world, the only sign that anywhere in the dark someone was standing watch for the lives of strangers. I would have told her so. I meant to, 100 times. But I was a rough man and she was a closed one, and we came of a people who did not say such things, who thought a thing felt hard enough did not need saying and might be spoiled by it. So we never said it. We only nodded, she and I, when we passed on the harbor road of a gray morning, she coming down cold and hollow-eyed from her night's watch, and I coming up from mine, 2 people who had spent the same black hours doing the same hard, thankless work, giving each other the one nod that meant I know. I know what you did last night. I saw your light. It was not enough. Nothing I did in those years was enough, but it was true and I hold to it. Now I must tell you about the Duke, and to do that I must first tell you the lie about the Duke, because the lie came first, and it is the lie that nearly killed her. Carrowmere Hall stands on the great cliffs a mile south of the harbor, a gray stone pile with its back turned square to the land and its whole face given to the sea, as though the house itself had quarreled with the world and gone to stare out the window. Its master in those years was Alaric, Duke of Carrowmere, whom the whole coast called in a hush, never to his face, the Storm Duke. He was young to hold so old and heavy a name, 830 I make it. The winter the sea gave him back, and he was tall and dark and spare of body, and he did not come down to the town, and he did not dance at the assembly rooms in the season, and he did not sit in his pew of a Sunday, but sent his rents to the church and his soul, it was supposed, to the devil. He did none of the things a duke is expected to do to buy himself the love of the small people beneath him. He rode the cliff paths in all weathers, alone, on a great black horse, with his collar turned up against the wind and his face set like the weather itself, and the few who met him on those high lonely paths said he looked straight through them as though they were a patch of fog he was waiting to have done blowing past. That was the outside of him. Here is the inside which I came to know, and which the town never troubled to learn, for the town preferred the outside, it made a better story. He had married young, a match of the heart and not the ledger, which was rare enough in his rank to be talked of, and his young duchess had gone across the water on a crossing early in their marriage, a short passage that 1,000 ships make safe, and her ship had foundered in a squall off a foreign coast, and she had drowned, and he had not been aboard, and that, the not being aboard, the being safe on his cliff while the sea took the one thing he loved, that was the nail he had hung himself on. He went hard after. He shut the hall. He turned the pictures to the wall, they said, and rode out grief on his black horse in the worst weather he could find, as though he were daring the sky to finish the job. He was not cold. He was a man burned so badly by the sea that he could not bear to be warm, which is a different thing entirely, though it wears the same gray coat. But the town did not deal in the inside of men. The town dealt in the other thing, and the other thing was this. They said the Storm Duke wrecked ships. I do not know who first said it. I came, in the end, to know very well who profited by it, and that is a later and a blacker part of my tale. But somewhere in those years the whisper started and grew, the way a whisper grows on a coast where the winter nights are long, and a good horror is better than a fire, that on the worst nights, false lights showed on the Carrowmere cliffs. Not the honest warning of a beacon set to turn a ship away from the rocks, but the black opposite, a lure, a light hung low and cunning to make a laboring master in the dark believe he saw a safe harbor mouth or another ship riding easy at anchor, and so draw him in under the hall onto the reef below the cliffs, to break his back in the surf, so that in the gray morning the wreckers could go down and gather the cargo washing in on the tide, the casks and bales and timber, and grow rich on murder. Wrecking, we call it. It is the oldest and the blackest trade on any hard coast, the deliberate luring of ships to their deaths for the spillage of them, and it is a hanging matter, and it was very, very convenient for someone that the whole town had settled on the cold shut-up grieving duke on the south cliff as the man who did it. He never came down to deny it. He never came down for anything. And silence, in a place that is hungry for a villain, is taken for a full confession every time. I did not believe it. I will tell you plainly why, and it is the first true secret of this tale, the one I carried alone for years and did nothing with, God forgive me. I did not believe the Duke of Carrowmere lured ships to the rocks, because the Duke of Carrowmere paid for our lifeboat. He did not do it openly, mind. It came to us roundabout, through a dry lawyer in the county town, a standing allowance renewed year upon year. The boat herself when the old one stove in, new oars, new gear, tarred canvas, oilskins for the crew, a keg of good rum to be broached after a hard service to bring the life back into frozen men, all of it from an account that named no name and asked no thanks. We took it and blessed it and never knew our benefactor. But I am a careful man with my gear, and one hard launch, cutting the maker's oilcloth off a fresh coil of line in a hurry, I found tucked beneath the wrapping the chandler's docket that had come with the order, folded small and forgotten, and the docket, in a clerk's plain hand, named the account it was charged to, and the account was the Carrowmere estate. I stood on that shingle with the docket in my hand and the launch waiting, and I felt the whole town's story turn over in my chest like a boat going beam onto a sea. A man who lures ships to the rocks to murder them for their cargo does not, in secret, on the quiet, buy and keep and furnish the one boat on the coast whose whole purpose is to row out and save the ships in trouble. It could not stand. It made no sense at all, unless the man on the south cliff was not the wrecker, unless the man on the south cliff was, in some hidden grieving way of his own, trying to hold back from the sea the very thing the sea had taken from him, unless the whole coast had got its devil, and its saint stood exactly back to front. I said as much once. In the tavern one winter night, with the ale in me and the docket's truth hot in my chest, I said out loud that I did not believe the Storm Duke wrecked ships and that I had a reason, and I was laughed down before I could give the reason, laughed down easy and good-natured and complete, the way a town laughs down a thing it does not wish to hear, because the story was too good to lose and too old to change. And Silas Coombe was a fine coxswain but no scholar and had likely mistook a docket. And here Silas. Drink up, so I drank up, and I let it lie. I told myself it was not a coxswain's place to walk up to the hall and knock on that great grey door and say to a duke, "Sir, I know you are not the devil they have made you. A man does not do such a thing. It would be an impertinence, a madness, a thing to be laughed at worse than the tavern laughed." And so the lie went on and grew and fed, and I who alone had a splinter of the truth did nothing with it, and I have had all the long years since to lie awake and know that a great deal of what came after might never have come at all if Silas Coombe had once found the courage to knock on a door. Now hold the three of them together in your mind's eye, as I hold them still, the plain girl and her unpaid fire on the north headland, keeping the sea off strangers, the grieving man behind his grey walls on the south cliff, hated for the one black thing he had not done, and between them, snug in the crook of the harbor, the town that fed on both of them and could not be troubled to see either. And I will tell you about the night the sea rose up and gave the Duke of Carrowmere back to the living. It was the worst gale I have known, before or since, in 40 years of standing on that shingle. It came up out of the sou'west with no more warning than a noon sky the color of a fresh bruise, and a swell that began to run long and oily, and wrong an hour before there was any wind to explain it. By dark it was blowing a full storm, and by midnight a thing beyond a storm, the kind of wind you cannot walk against but only lean into, that takes the whole crest off a wave and flings it half a mile inland, so that the grass on the cliff tops tastes of salt for a week after, and the sheep will not graze it. The harbor itself, that is sheltered enough on most nights to seem another world from the open coast, boiled white in its own mouth, the seas marching in through the entrance and standing up in a green wall, and falling in a smother of white that shook the very keystones under our feet. We did not launch. I will be honest with you, for I have never lied about a service in my life, and I will not begin at my age. There was a moment that we might have. Word came down, breathless, from a man who had been up on the harbor wall, that there was a vessel out in the bay, laboring, showing no light he could make out, being set down toward the coast. My crew were there in a moment, a dozen of them, streaming water looking to me, and the boat was ready on her blocks, and every man of them would have gone if I had said the word, because that is the kind of men they were. And I looked at the harbor mouth, at that standing white wall of sea where the entrance should be, and I knew the way a coxswain knows in his gut and his 40 years and his own held breath, that if I put my boat and my 12 living men into that mouth on that night, the sea would take them all before we cleared the pier heads, and there would be a second wreck to lay beside the first and 13 more names for the mariner's corner of the churchyard, and we would save no one. So I did not say the word. I have carried the men I did not send out that night as heavy as any I ever lost, but I would decide the same again, for it was the truth of the sea and not my fear that decided it. We stood on the shingle in the roar with the boat ready at our backs and our fists useless at our sides, and we did the hardest thing there is to do on a lifeboat coast, which is nothing but stand and stare out into the black and strain our ears for what we could not stop. And up on the north headland in that, Mercy Fen kept her light. I did not know it then, not for certain, though I looked for it. The murk was too thick most of that night to see the headland at all. But now and again the rack tore open for a moment, and there, impossibly, in a wind that I do not think I could have stood upright in, small and low and fighting for its life but burning, there was her fire on rack point. I have gone up that headland since, in half that wind, on a fair testing day, and been thrown flat on my face on the turf by a single gust. How a slight girl kept an open coal fire alive on that exposed point through the whole of that night, I did not understand then and do not understand now, save that she did it, and that she nearly died doing it, and that 20 living souls who will never know her name owe her every breath they have drawn since. She told me, long years after, in the only account of that night she ever gave a living creature, exactly how she did it, and it was 6 words. I had asked her gently, an old man's foolish gentle question, how she had ever kept the fire lit in such a wind. She looked at the sea for a while, as she always did before she answered anything, and then she said, "I promised, it doesn't go out again." That is all. That is the whole of what Mercy Fen ever said about the bravest single thing I have known one human being to do. She lay across that fire the night long with her own body for a windbreak, and fed it coal from her creel with her bare hands, cracked and split and bleeding from the cold and the raw edges of the coal, and would not let it die, because she had promised a dead man on the night he died that his light would not go out again, and there was a ship on the water, and the ship must see the teeth. The ship was a brig, the Celestine, out of a French port, running for a shelter she would never make. And aboard the Celestine, coming home at last from the far country where he had finally gone to lay his old grief in the ground, and had found, I think, that grief does not stay in the ground you dig for it, was the Duke of Caromere. Mercy's light did its work. It turned the Celestine off rack point in the black. I am as sure of that as I am of anything, for a ship that could not see those teeth would have struck them square and gone down there with all hands, and that was 20 men who lived because of a fisher girl's fire. But the sea is not to be cheated of everything on such a night. Turned off the teeth, the brig was driven on down the coast, past the harbor she could not enter, and struck at last on the long outer sand a mile up the shore, the place where the light could warn but not save, and in the surf there she broke her back in the dark and went over, and the sea took her people, near every one. In the gray of the morning, when the wind had at last cried itself hoarse and fallen, and a low sick daylight came up over a flat exhausted sea, we walked the shore, my crew and I and half the town, doing the slow sad work that follows such a night on such a coast, the walking of the rack for what the sea has left. And what it had left that morning for 2 miles of strand was a horror I will not set down in full, the broken spars and the tangled cordage and the burst casks and the poor drowned shapes among them that had been men the evening before, laid along the tide line by the sea as neat and as careless as weed. We did the work. It is work you do numb and pray after. And it was not I who found him alive, it was Mercy. She had come down off her headland at first light, gray to the lips, half dead herself with the cold and the night-long fight for the fire, her hands a ruin. And instead of turning for her cottage and her own hearth and the rest she had more than earned, she had gone, because it was what she always did after a bad night, because it was the whole shape of her, straight down to the tide line to walk the rack, in case, in the Mercy that was her very name, the sea had left among the dead some one soul that it was too late for, but not quite too late. A quarter-mile up from the broken Celestine, where the black rocks run out into the surf and the retreating sea sucks and boils and drags around them, she saw a dark shape roll in the backwash. Roll and go still, and roll again, a man, face down, more of the sea in him than the air, and the next long draw of the undertow would have him back out and gone for good. And Mercy Fenn, who had not slept nor been warm nor eaten in a day and a night, whose father that same killing water had drowned, went in after him,